In a distant galaxy, far beyond Earth's reach, the Rilverian species lived on a planet called Virica. It was a world of beauty, with vast oceans, towering mountains, and cities that shimmered under the light of their star. The Rilverians were peaceful and wise, having spent centuries developing their technology and culture. They believed in the harmony of the universe and valued knowledge above all else. But one day, everything changed. Their sun, Vale, which had been stable for billions of years, began to grow unstable. Slowly at first, then with terrifying speed, it started to expand. The once golden light of Vale turned red, casting an eerie glow across the skies. Rilverian scientists rushed to study the phenomenon, hoping it was a temporary fluctuation. But their fears soon became reality. Their star was dying. Within a few months, it would collapse, taking the entire planet with it. Panic spread throughout the Rilverian cities. Desperation set in. They could no longer ignore the fact that their homeworld was doomed. Even their advanced technology, which had once been their pride, could do little to stop the inevitable. The Rilverians, though intelligent and resourceful, had never encountered a problem this fast. Their sun's instability was beyond anything they had ever faced. With no time to waste, the Rilverian Council, the governing body of their species, made a decision. They had to ask for help. For the first time in their history, the Rilverians broadcast a distress signal across the universe. Their message was simple but urgent. To any who hear this message, we are in need. Our sun is dying, and we have no way to save our world. We seek aid from any advanced civilization who may have the power to help. Time is running out. The signal traveled across the galaxy, reaching countless star systems. But the silence that followed was deafening. Days turned into weeks, and still no response came. The Rilverians watched helplessly as their star continued to grow larger, its light growing more intense and dangerous. Their planet's temperature increased, causing wildfires and storm systems that devastated their cities. Food and water supplies began to run low, and many Rilverians were forced to abandon their homes in search of shelter in the deep caverns of their planet. The Council, now with little hope left, made a final decision. They would send their distress signal even farther, beyond their galaxy, to a place they had never explored before: the Milky Way. On Earth, the world was experiencing a quiet period of its own. The year was 2125, and humanity had advanced greatly since the days of space exploration. They had colonized nearby planets, built enormous space stations, and even discovered ways to harness energy from distant stars. But despite their progress, the people of Earth were divided. Nations still struggled with conflict, inequality, and the burdens of history. The Earthlings had not yet reached a point of total unity. That is, until the signal arrived. The first message from the Rilverians was a simple series of strange symbols, like nothing humans had seen before. At first, the world's leaders were unsure what to make of it. It took days of decoding and analysis before human scientists realized the truth. The message was a cry for help from a species on the edge of extinction. The world reacted in shock. At the United Nations headquarters, a meeting was called. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered, as news of the Rilverian crisis spread like wildfire. People everywhere watched in awe as the message was translated and broadcast to the global public. What followed was not the usual chaos of political debates. This time, something different happened. Across the globe, humanity came together. People from all walks of life, from farmers to doctors, engineers to teachers, all understood the gravity of the situation. They realized that this was their chance to show what humanity was truly capable of. Governments set aside their differences, and for the first time in history, Earth united in purpose. The task was clear: help the Rilverians before it was too late. In a matter of days, humanity's space agencies, NASA, ESA, and others, formed a joint task force. Scientists, engineers, and military leaders came together, drawing up plans to aid the Rilverians. No one knew exactly how they could help, but they knew they had to try. They would not let an entire civilization perish because of their own inaction. And so, humanity answered the call. The Rilverians, still reeling from their devastating losses, had little hope left when they received a reply from Earth. The message from Earth was simple, yet powerful. "We will help. We are coming." It was the first sign of hope they had received in weeks. On Earth, preparations began immediately. Thousands of ships, cargo vessels, and technology were mobilized. The people of Earth were ready to do whatever it took to save the Rilverian race. And as the Rilverian sun grew more unstable by the day, a new chapter of history began, one where the survival of an entire species rested on the shoulders of humanity. As the Rilverian sun grew more unstable with each passing day, the world watched with bated breath. Earth had made its decision to help, but now, the hard part began. The urgency of the situation was clear. Time was running out. Every moment that passed brought the Rilverians closer to the moment when their sun would consume their planet, and humanity knew they couldn't afford to waste a second. In a secure, underground facility at the United Nations headquarters, the world's top scientists, engineers, and diplomats gathered. They worked day and night, poring over the Rilverian data. The message had been decoded, but the information was overwhelming. The Rilverian star, Vale, was growing unstable at an accelerating rate. It would soon begin to collapse, and nothing the Rilverians had could stop it. The mission was clear. Humanity needed to save Vale, or the entire species would perish. But how could they do it? The challenge was immense. Earth had never faced a crisis of this scale. There was no technology that could immediately stabilize a dying sun. Humanity's best minds put their heads together, brainstorming solutions to the impossible problem. There were many ideas, some more practical than others, but one, in particular, began to take shape: a solar stabilizer. The plan was simple, yet wildly ambitious. A massive device would need to be constructed, powerful enough to generate enough energy to temporarily stabilize Vale's intense instability. It would be launched from Earth, carried by a fleet of spacecraft, and deployed into the heart of the Rilverian star system. Once in place, the stabilizer would act like a giant shield, reducing the radiation and heat output from Vale long enough for the Rilverians to evacuate their planet and find new homes. It was a plan that seemed impossible on paper. The first hurdle was building the solar stabilizer. Scientists and engineers from across the globe rallied together. The task was enormous. Nothing like it had ever been attempted before. The stabilizer itself would have to be enormous, the size of a small city, yet it needed to be lightweight enough to be transported through space. The technology to create such a device didn't exist, but humanity's brightest minds were determined to make it work. With limited time and resources, every engineer, technician, and scientist worked tirelessly to construct the device, bringing their expertise and creativity to the table. Meanwhile, in the skies above Earth, preparations were underway to launch the mission. The joint space agencies of Earth, NASA, ESA, and others, quickly organized a fleet of spacecraft for the mission. These ships would carry the stabilizer and the human teams necessary to launch it into the heart of the Rilverian system. The journey would be long and dangerous, but there was no choice. The Rilverians had no time left. The volunteers who would carry out this mission were both brave and determined. Among them was Captain Elena Torres, a seasoned astronaut with decades of experience. She had led many missions, but none like this one. This mission was different. It wasn't just about the survival of her crew. It was about saving an entire species from extinction. As the team gathered for their briefing, Captain Torres stood in front of them, a calm yet determined presence. "Everyone on this mission is here because they believe in something bigger than themselves," she said. "This isn't just about science or technology. It's about saving lives. Every day, every hour we waste is another step closer to losing them. But we won't let that happen. We're going to do whatever it takes to make sure the Rilverians have a future. Our future." The team nodded, each of them feeling the weight of the task ahead. It wasn't just a mission. It was a responsibility. A responsibility to the Rilverians, yes, but also to every person on Earth who had put their trust in them. They couldn't afford to fail. The fleet was assembled, ready to take off. The spacecraft were equipped with the latest technology, from advanced engines to life support systems that could keep them alive during the long journey. But even with all the preparations, there was no guarantee that they would succeed. The Rilverian system was far beyond Earth's own solar system, and the route was fraught with dangers. Asteroid fields, unpredictable space anomalies, and even the possibility of encountering hostile forces. No one knew for sure what lay ahead. But for the human team, there was no turning back. They had made a promise, and they would see it through to the end. As the spacecraft lifted off from Earth, the world watched. For the first time in history, humanity was united in a common cause. People gathered in cities, schools, and homes to watch the live broadcasts of the mission. It was a moment of great pride, but also great anxiety. Would the mission succeed? Would the human fleet be able to save the Rilverians in time? In the Rilverian capital, the people looked up at the sky, silently hoping that the help they so desperately needed would arrive. The first glimmers of hope they had felt in weeks were now in the hands of Earth, and all they could do was wait. As the human fleet made its way through space toward the Rilverian system, Earth experienced a shift that would define the future. The mission to save an entire species was more than just a scientific venture. It was a symbol of something much greater. It was a symbol of unity, of humanity's ability to come together when the stakes were high. The world had watched in silence as the spacecraft launched. Now, people from every corner of the Earth felt a sense of pride and anticipation. Nations that had once been divided by borders, politics, and differences now stood together, united under a single cause: saving the Rilverians. The task was enormous, the risks were high, but the human spirit was stronger than ever. In the days following the launch, something extraordinary happened on Earth. People began to put aside their disagreements. Governments that had once been at odds with one another now worked together, setting aside petty conflicts to focus on the larger picture. The sense of competition that had defined humanity for centuries was replaced by a newfound cooperation. Scientists from rival space programs shared their research, engineers from different countries worked side by side, and leaders put aside their personal ambitions for the greater good. In the United Nations, leaders from all over the world met regularly to monitor the progress of the mission. For the first time, decisions were made not based on national interests, but on the collective need to ensure the survival of the Rilverian people. The message from Earth's leaders was clear. This wasn't just a mission to help another species. It was a mission that would prove humanity's capacity for kindness, unity, and determination. The media played a crucial role in spreading this message. News stations and social media outlets broadcasted updates on the mission, showing footage of the spacecraft traveling through the vast emptiness of space. People everywhere, from bustling cities to quiet villages, tuned in to watch the unfolding journey. The mission was no longer just about a group of astronauts in space. It was about every person on Earth. People everywhere held their breath as the mission progressed, hoping that the humans in space would succeed in their task. In the heart of the Rilverian capital, the people of Viewership also experienced a shift. The Rilverian government, which had once been hesitant to accept help from an unknown species, now felt a spark of hope. The thought that Earth, an entirely different species, would answer their call for help brought a sense of renewed optimism. Their home planet was still on the brink of destruction, but now there was a chance. There was a chance for survival. Rilverian families gathered together to watch the communication screens, eagerly awaiting news of the human fleet's progress. The Rilverian Council, too, monitored the mission closely, sending regular messages of gratitude and support to Earth. They were deeply moved by the fact that a species from another world would risk everything to save them. It was a reminder that in the vastness of the universe, there was always the potential for kindness, even in the darkest of times. Back on Earth, people of all ages began to rally together in their support for the mission. Schools across the globe held assemblies, teaching students about the importance of helping others, about working together to solve problems, and about the power of unity. The mission became a lesson for the future, showing that when humanity came together, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. As the weeks passed and the fleet drew closer to the Rilverian system, Earth's efforts to support the mission only grew stronger. Volunteers worked around the clock to prepare more supplies for the evacuees, while governments ensured that the human mission would be well supported upon their arrival. Earth's space programs continued to monitor the fleet's progress, ensuring that the mission would be completed successfully, no matter the cost. But it wasn't just governments and organizations that were involved. Ordinary people, too, felt they had a part to play. Volunteers joined efforts to collect donations, raise awareness, and support the families of the astronauts. People from all walks of life, from doctors to farmers, from students to retirees, contributed in whatever way they could. It was a time of shared purpose, a time when everyone, regardless of their background, felt connected to something much greater than themselves. As the mission neared the Rilverian system, Captain Elena Torres and her crew on board the lead spacecraft prepared for the most important part of their journey, the deployment of the solar stabilizer. They had received countless messages of support from Earth, and their hearts were full of pride and determination. They knew that this mission was not just for the Rilverians. It was for all of humanity. If they succeeded, they would prove that humans were capable of something truly extraordinary. In the vastness of space, as the fleet approached the dying star of Vale, the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. The world watched, and the Rilverians prayed. The hope of two species rested on the shoulders of the human fleet, and the promise of a new beginning lay just ahead. But no matter what happened, one thing was certain: humanity had answered the call. As the human fleet neared the Rilverian system, the enormity of the task ahead became more apparent with every passing hour. Captain Elena Torres and her crew, along with the rest of the human team, were filled with anticipation. Yet there was little time for celebration. They were facing a race against time, and every second that passed brought them closer to a deadline they couldn't afford to miss. The solar stabilizer was ready to be deployed, but the journey to place it in the heart of the Rilverian star system was fraught with danger. The spacecraft, which had been traveling for weeks, were now entering an uncharted region of space. The Rilverian system, while beautiful and thriving, was now a volatile environment, with unstable solar storms disrupting the once calm space lanes. The intense radiation from Vale, their dying star, created powerful gravitational anomalies that could pull the ships off course if they weren't careful. As they approached the system, the crew worked with precision. Every ship in the fleet followed a strict trajectory, guided by Earth's most advanced navigation systems. But even with the best technology, there were still countless variables to consider. In the command center of Captain Torres' ship, the mood was tense. The clock was ticking, and the pressure was mounting. "We're entering the danger zone," said Commander Paul Richards, the fleet's chief navigator, his voice steady but laced with concern. "The solar winds are stronger than predicted. We'll need to adjust our course immediately." Torres nodded. "Do it. And make sure all ships in the fleet follow our lead. The stabilizers got to be deployed at exactly the right moment, or we risk failure." The rest of the crew moved quickly, making adjustments to their spacecraft's controls. In the quiet of the command room, there was a sense of urgency. Outside the ship's hull, the swirling colors of space seemed to mock their haste, a reminder that they were racing against something far greater than any human technology could predict. As they continued on their path, the tension was palpable. Each ship in the fleet faced its own set of challenges. Some navigated through asteroid fields, while others struggled against the shifting solar winds. The sun itself was growing increasingly erratic, sending bursts of solar flares toward the fleet. heating up the ship's hulls to unbearable temperatures. But humanity was determined. Back on Earth, the media broadcasted live updates, keeping the entire planet in the loop. People from every nation gathered around their screens, watching in awe as the fleet made its way to the Rilverian system. The excitement was matched only by the anxiety that filled the hearts of everyone who understood what was at stake. No one could afford to look away. The fate of the Rilverian people, and in some ways, humanity's reputation as a species, was on the line. In the Rilverian capital, thousands of citizens stood in the streets, eyes fixed on the skies. They had been waiting for this moment for weeks, uncertain if help would come in time. The constant anxiety of seeing their world burn under the relentless heat of their dying sun had taken a toll on their spirits. But now, there was hope. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was hope. The Rilverian Council watched closely, sending messages of encouragement to the humans who had risked their lives for them. They had never expected such a response from another species, such dedication to saving them. It was a debt they would never be able to repay, no matter the outcome. As the fleet moved deeper into the system, the risks grew. The gravitational anomalies were becoming stronger, and several ships were forced to make emergency maneuvers to avoid being pulled off course. One of the smaller support ships, the Sirian, suddenly lost power as a burst of solar radiation struck its engines. Sparks flew from its hull as the crew struggled to regain control. "Sirian is in trouble," shouted Lieutenant Sarah Lee, a crew member in the command center. Captain Torres wasted no time. "This is it," she said. "We can't leave anyone behind. Get us to them. Now." With the Sirian drifting dangerously close to a gravitational field, Torres made a bold decision. She ordered her ship to change course and move into the path of the stricken vessel, despite the risk it posed to the entire mission. "Hold on," shouted Torres as her ship adjusted its course, moving in sync with the stricken vessel. The tension in the command room was unbearable as everyone watched the readings on their monitors. If they failed to reach the Sirian in time, it could be lost forever. But just as the ship teetered on the brink of disaster, the crew on the Sirian managed to restore its engines, and with a roar, the ship regained power. The crew cheered, but the mission was far from over. They had narrowly avoided catastrophe. But the journey to deploy the stabilizer was still underway. "We're not out of the woods yet," Commander Richards said, his voice still firm. "But we're closer than we were." Despite the setback, the fleet pressed on. They had no choice. They could not afford to fail. With the stabilizer now only hours away from being deployed, they were closer than ever to saving the Rilverian homeworld. But time was running out, and every moment felt like an eternity. The Rilverian sun loomed in the distance, its fiery surface growing more unstable with each passing minute. The race against time had become a race for survival. The human fleet had reached the edge of the Rilverian system, and the final leg of their journey had begun. With only hours left before the Rilverian sun reached a critical stage of instability, Captain Elena Torres and her crew knew they had to act fast. The solar stabilizer, the key to saving the Rilverian people, was ready for deployment. Yet, despite all the preparations, the risks were immense. Every decision they made could determine the future of two species. Captain Torres stood at the helm of the lead spacecraft, staring at the massive, swirling cloud of gas and dust that surrounded the dying sun. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. Vale, the Rilverian star, was a fireball of destruction, sending waves of heat and energy into the void. It had once been a source of life for the Rilverian people, but now it was their greatest threat. "We're approaching the launch point," Commander Paul Richards reported from his station. "The stabilizer's trajectory is on course. We'll need to deploy it at exactly the right moment to prevent further solar flares from destabilizing the system." Torres nodded, her eyes never leaving the screen. They were so close now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. The solar flares were getting stronger with each passing minute, and the temperature inside the ships had been rising steadily. The crew's discomfort was nothing compared to the stakes they were facing. "Everyone, prepare for final deployment," Torres ordered, her voice calm despite the tension. "This is what we've trained for. Let's finish this." The crew moved with practiced precision. The stabilizer was massive, and the launch was going to be the most difficult part of the entire mission. It wasn't just about getting the device into the right position. It had to be activated at precisely the right moment to diffuse the solar radiation and stabilize Vale's core. On Earth, billions of people were watching the mission unfold. The entire world had come together in this moment, united in hope and anticipation. The media coverage was intense, and across the globe, people gathered in front of televisions, computers, and smartphones, waiting for the moment that could save an entire civilization. Meanwhile, in the Rilvarian capital, citizens stood in silence, watching the skies. The vast majority of them had already evacuated their homes, but there were still those who clung to the hope that the human mission would succeed. The Rilvarian government had mobilized every resource to prepare for the worst, but they couldn't stop hoping that the humans would pull through. Back in space, the fleet was drawing closer to the heart of the system. The immense gravitational forces were now pulling at the ships, making every maneuver more difficult. The human crews worked together, expertly handling their spacecraft, but even the smallest mistake could mean disaster. "Gravitational distortion is increasing," reported Lieutenant Sarah Lee, her eyes glued to the monitor. "We're going to need to make final course corrections. The stabilizer has to be deployed in the center of the system. If it's even a little off, it could make things worse." Captain Torres took a deep breath. She understood the gravity of the situation. If the stabilizer wasn't deployed perfectly, the radiation from the sun could reach dangerous levels, and the whole system could be thrown into chaos. The lives of the Rilvarian people were hanging in the balance, and there was no room for error. "Adjusting course," Torres commanded, her voice firm. "Everyone stay sharp." The fleet adjusted its trajectory as the lead spacecraft moved closer to the launch point. The stabilizer, locked in place and ready for deployment, was carefully monitored by the crew. It was a delicate operation, requiring perfect timing and precision. If there was even a slight error in their calculations, everything they had worked for could come crashing down. As they approached the final point, Captain Torres felt her heart race. The solar flares from Vale were now visible, fiery tongues of energy that rippled across the vast distance between them. The force of the solar radiation was powerful enough to destroy a ship in seconds, but Torres knew that she and her crew had no choice. They had to do this. "Deploy the stabilizer now," Torres shouted. The moment had arrived. The massive stabilizer was ejected from the lead spacecraft and propelled toward the heart of the Rilvarian system. It moved quickly, cutting through the vacuum of space, heading straight for the dying sun. The crew watched in tense silence, knowing that their mission had reached its most critical moment. Back on Earth, people held their breath as the stabilizer hurtled toward Vale. Everyone was waiting for the moment of truth. The mission was now in the hands of the brave crew in space. As the stabilizer neared the sun, the entire fleet adjusted their positions to monitor its impact. There was nothing more they could do but watch. The stabilizer's activation was programmed to occur at the perfect moment, but the team still felt an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. Would it work? Would the sun stabilize long enough for the Rilvarian people to evacuate? Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the stabilizer activated. A wave of energy rippled outward, surrounding the heart of Vale like a protective shield. The energy from the sun began to stabilize, slowly but surely, as the stabilizer did its work. The flares died down, and the sun's core calmed, no longer threatening to engulf the Rilvarian world. "We did it," shouted Commander Richards, his voice filled with relief. Captain Torres allowed herself a small smile, but the battle wasn't over. They still had to make sure the Rilvarian people could evacuate safely. The stabilizer had worked, but now the Rilvarian species needed a place to call home. The Rilvarian sun had stabilized, but the mission was far from over. Captain Alina Torres stood in the command center, staring at the monitors, watching as the energy from Vale slowly calmed. The solar flares that had once threatened to destroy the entire system were now under control, but the work was just beginning. There was still one final crucial task ahead: the evacuation of the Rilverian people. On Earth, the news of the stabilizer's success spread like wildfire. People everywhere celebrated, but no one knew the full extent of the work still needed. The Rilverian species needed a new home, a place where they could rebuild and thrive once again. Humanity had answered the call for help, but now they had to ensure that the Rilverian people would survive. The Rilverian government, guided by the leadership of the Council, quickly initiated their evacuation plans, but they faced an overwhelming challenge. The Rilverian planet was no longer habitable for the vast majority of their population. Entire cities lay in ruins from the constant heat and the rising radiation. The people were scattered, many seeking shelter in underground bunkers, while others clung to the remnants of their homes. "We've bought them time," Captain Torres said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "But now we need to get them to safety. We can't leave anyone behind." The human fleet had already sent out additional transports to help with the evacuation. Ships filled with supplies and medical equipment arrived daily to provide the Rilverians with the resources they desperately needed. However, they couldn't just transport everyone to safety in a few hours. The evacuation would take time that the Rilverian people didn't have to waste. The Rilverian leaders, though grateful for humanity's help, were also burdened by the reality of their situation. They had always been proud of their advanced technology and their ability to care for their people. But now, they were forced to rely on an entirely different species to survive. It was humbling, yet the Rilverian Council was determined to do everything they could to make the process as smooth as possible. "We will find a way," said Rilverian Ambassador Koval, his voice filled with quiet strength. "The humans have shown us that there is hope, and we will not give up." On the human side, the United Nations and world governments worked together, coordinating efforts to build temporary homes on nearby planets and moons. Earth had its own share of challenges, but in this moment, nothing was more important than ensuring the survival of the Rilverian species. As the first wave of Rilverian evacuees boarded the human ships, there was a profound sense of unity. It wasn't just the survival of another species that had brought humanity together. It was the opportunity to show the universe that kindness and cooperation could prevail, even in the darkest times. People from every nation on Earth, from the smallest villages to the largest cities, sent their support. Governments set aside their differences, united under the banner of compassion and solidarity. The evacuation was no easy task. As more Rilverian ships arrived to transport their people, the human fleet worked tirelessly to guide them to safe zones. Some ships carried injured citizens, while others transported entire families. The human astronauts and crew members took on the task with care and attention. There were many moments of tension as ships navigated through the dangerous remnants of the Rilverian atmosphere, but they never faltered. Every ship that left the Rilverian system carried with it hundreds, sometimes thousands of lives. As each wave of evacuees was safely transported to their new homes on distant planets, there was a collective sense of relief. But it was also bittersweet. For the Rilverians, leaving behind their world, their history, their culture, and their families, was a painful sacrifice. Yet they knew it was the only chance for their future. On Earth, citizens gathered in unity to offer their support. People sent messages of hope and encouragement to the Rilverian evacuees, welcoming them to their new homes. Human volunteers worked alongside Rilverian families to help them adjust to their new surroundings, offering their assistance in building temporary shelters and learning the basics of life on their new planets. It wasn't an easy transition, but the Rilverian people were resilient. Captain Torres and her crew continued their work, knowing that the next few months would be critical. As more Rilverian evacuees were safely relocated, the human fleet remained in place, ensuring that every ship made it safely out of the danger zone. The work was exhausting, but there was a sense of pride in the air. Humanity had done something extraordinary, and now, the Rilverian people had a chance at a new life. But Captain Torres knew there was still much work to do. The fleet would remain in the Rilverian system for several more months, helping with the last stages of the evacuation and ensuring the long-term stability of their new homeworlds. However, she also knew that humanity had done something incredible. They had not only saved a species, but had shown that in times of crisis, the power of compassion, teamwork, and unity could change the course of history. As the last of the Rilverian evacuees left their dying sun behind, Captain Torres watched the fleet's progress from the command center. It was a quiet moment, one that spoke volumes about what humanity was capable of. The universe, once vast and indifferent, had witnessed the strength of humanity's heart, and the Rilverian people, though far from their old home, would never forget the species that had answered their call when no one else would. Humanity had shown the world, and the universe, that when it truly mattered, Earth would always be there to help. Months had passed since the final wave of Rilverian evacuees left their dying sun behind. The human fleet, still stationed near the Rilverian system, had completed its mission, and the last of the ships had returned to Earth. The planet had changed, not just because of the rescue operation, but because humanity had witnessed firsthand the power of cooperation and compassion across galaxies. Back on Earth, people were celebrating, but not just because the mission had succeeded. They celebrated the unity of two species who, despite their differences, had come together in the most challenging of times. The Rilverian people, now living on distant planets, had begun to rebuild. They had found homes on new worlds, thanks to the help of humanity. The evacuation was complete, and the Rilverian species had a second chance at life. Captain Elena Torres, who had led the human fleet in the Rilverian rescue, stood in the quiet of her office. She had not yet fully processed everything that had happened. The images of Rilverian families leaving their destroyed world behind were still fresh in her mind. But in those images, she also saw hope. Humanity had helped them, and that was something she would carry with her forever. She had spoken with Ambassador Koval only a few days before, who had personally thanked her and the entire human fleet for the sacrifice they had made. "We will never forget this," Koval had said. "The Rilverian people will always remember who saved us when we were on the brink of destruction." It was a humbling moment, and Torres had to admit that she felt proud. The mission had been dangerous, and there had been moments when it seemed like they might not make it. But they had succeeded, and the Rilverian people were safe. Now, the question was what came next. The Rilverian species was safe, but they had a long road ahead. Their homeworld was gone, and they would have to learn to adapt to life on new planets. But the Rilverians were a resilient people, and with humanity's help, they would rebuild. Humanity had a role to play in this new chapter. The Rilverian people would need guidance as they adapted to their new homes. New cities were being built on the planets that had been designated for the Rilverian population. Scientists, engineers, and medical teams from Earth were working alongside Rilverian experts to ensure that their new civilizations thrived. Captain Torres had been invited to speak at a global summit in honor of the rescue mission. World leaders would gather to discuss the future of humanity's role in the galaxy. But this summit wasn't just about politics. It was about creating a future where species could work together, help one another, and face challenges with the knowledge that no one was alone in the universe. As Torres prepared to give her speech, she thought about what she would say. She knew that words could only do so much. The real work lay in ensuring that the legacy of the Rilverian rescue lived on in the hearts and minds of humanity. Earth had shown that it was capable of extraordinary acts of kindness. Now it was time to keep that spirit alive. She began her speech by addressing the room filled with leaders from around the world. The mission we undertook was not just about saving a species. It was about proving to ourselves that we are capable of something greater. The Rilverian people were on the brink of extinction, and when they called for help, humanity answered. That is what we must always remember. The room fell silent as she continued. In the vastness of space, it's easy to feel small and insignificant. But our actions have proven that even the smallest among us can make a difference. We saved the Rilverian people, not because we had to, but because it was the right thing to do. And that, I believe, is the true spirit of humanity. The applause that followed was heartfelt and loud. But Torres knew that the applause wasn't for her alone. It was for every person who had worked on the mission, for every volunteer, for every leader who had put aside differences to come together for a common cause. After the speech, Torres joined Ambassador Koval, who had traveled to Earth to meet with world leaders. The two of them shared a quiet moment, looking out over the city. "You've done more than save our people," Captain Koval said, his voice full of gratitude. "You've shown us that there is always hope, even when it feels like all is lost. The Rilverian people will always be in your debt." Torres smiled, her heart full of pride. "It's not just me. It's everyone, humans, Rilverians, and those who work together. Together, we created a new beginning." As they looked out over the bustling city below, Torres couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism for the future. Humanity had taken a giant leap forward, not through technology or war, but through compassion and cooperation. They had proven that, no matter how vast the universe seemed, there was always room for kindness and unity. The mission to save the Rilverian people had been humanity's greatest test, but it had also been its greatest triumph. And now, with the Rilverians settled into their new homes and a new era of peace on the horizon, humanity had learned a powerful lesson. In the end, it wasn't the size of the fleet or the strength of the weapons that mattered. It was the size of the heart that counted.